Morning, students. Namaskar, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, students and scholars, teachers and trainers, professors, professionals, respected doctors and directors, adorable ministers and managers, honorable advocates, advertisers, administrators and advisors, the most honorable present President Modi ji, I heartily, cordially welcome. It's really nice time, nice place, nice section today. You are listening. I am Dr. Rakesh from USA, defining, explaining literature. As earlier we have studied, language means expression of our thoughts, ideas. Literature is the name of mirror of our society. Literature means glimpses of our society, what is happening in the society, culturally, socially, emotionally, intellectually and even spiritually. All these aspects are covered in literature. Literature without concept cannot be understood completely. Popularly, literature means anything that is printed in a book. But actually, literature means that which is of universal interest to man, but applies to a local or professional or merely personal interest will not belong to literature. Charles Lamb went to the extreme of excluding the works of Gibbon, Hume and Flavius Josephs together with directories and almanacs. Hallam comprised jurisprudence, theology and medicine under the general head of literature. Both the points of view are wrong. Literature is composed of those books which, by reason of their subject matter and style, are of general human interest. Literature is mainly meant for giving pleasures. The weekly sermons of Christianity, which have extensive influence on the popular mind, do not belong to literature, while Shakespeare's drama on Greek drama is literature, because it fulfills the primary function of aesthetic satisfaction by reason of its subject matter and the manner of treatment. Literature, whether it imparts knowledge or not, is of lasting human significance because it continues to appeal to man for its subject matter of enduring interest and the attractive mode of treatment. So, in judging the merit of a piece of literature, both matter and manner have to be taken into account. Fundamentally, literature is the representation of life. To the medium of language, it is, however, not an exact replica of life. It is an interpretation of life as life shapes itself in the mind of the writer. Thus, the imagination of the writer is an important factor presentation of life, that literature offers an appeal to a particular class of readers, but literature yields aesthetic pleasure and appeals to people of all ages and climes. It lives by virtue of the life which it embodies and the way in which it is presented. There is no real consensus or one all-embracing definition of the term literature. Most of the definitions of literature are given by scholars according to their subjective experience and their context. Some scholars have defined it in broad sense as anything that is written. Reed sees it in the narrow sense of writing which expresses and communicates thought, feelings and attitudes towards life. The broad definition of literature appears to be vague and amorphous in that it includes works that are not literature per se, like works in fields of education, biology, history, and a host of others by virtue of the fact that they are written. However, they cannot qualify as real literature. The narrow definition delineates literature from its general purview to what can be called literature as a subject of study. A personal perusal of some more definitions will provide a clearer light on the real nature of literature. According to Moody, literature springs from our inborn love of telling a story, of arranging words in pleasing patterns, of expression in words, some special aspects of our human experience. Milton defines literature from functional perspective as the imaginative work that gives us for arts, recreation, recognition, revelation and redemption. Rees described literature as the permanent expression in words of some thoughts or feelings, in ideas about life and the world. An analysis of these definitions reveals that certain things are common to all the definitions. They all recognize the fact that literature is imaginative. Literature expresses thoughts and feelings. Literature deals with life experiences. Literature uses words in powerful, effective, and yet captivating manner. Literature promotes recreation and revelation of hidden facts. Literature can thus be summed up as permanent expression in words, especially arranged in pleasing accepted patterns or forms conveying thoughts, feelings, ideas, or other special aspects of human experiences. De Quincey distinguishes two types of literature. The distinction between the two types depends upon the difference of function which they fulfill. The literature of knowledge is meant for teaching, while the literature of power has the function is moving and inspiring the readers. The literature of knowledge appeals to the reasoning faculties, while the literature of power appeals to higher understanding through the emotions of pleasure and sympathy. Ultimately, it makes for wisdom, but it works through human passion and genial emotions. Literature of knowledge gives us information which is new, but literature of power gives us information which is new, but literature of power gives us the highest truth which is eternal. The literature of knowledge has a provisional appeal, but the literature of power has a permanent interest. The principle the Principia of Isaac Newton, which was revolutionary in the matter of giving information, had to give way to other books which appeared with newer knowledge and more fresh information. The appeal of this book was destroyed in the course of time. On the contrary, the Iliad, the Prometheus of Aeschylus, King Lear and Paradise Lost are eternal in their appeal. They remain unique and distinct. This uniqueness, this performance of appeal is the first and foremost quality of a piece of literature. Literature deals with life as it is seen and experienced by the individual writer. It may be described as imaginative reconstruction of life. It is a form of art, and as such imagination plays a vital part in the presentation of life in literature. It has been rightly said, personal experience is the basis of all real literature. Aristotle hits the mark in his use of the word mimes. Aristotle hits the mark in his use of the word mimesis. He stresses the representation of universal patterns of human behavior and of an action embodying these. Moreover, an artist has to shape his plot or structure of emotion and events as the case may be. He is a creator, and his creative activity lies as much in his imaginative selection of life as in his rendering the same with the help of linguistic tools. Thus, the term literature is limited to imaginative literature. Poetry, drama, fiction, etc. It yields aesthetic pleasure. It yields aesthetic pleasure by reason of its eternal appeal of subject matter and style. It creates of personal reading of life, but it is elevated to a work of universal interest by virtue of its mode of literature. Its language is connotative and evocative rather than referential and demonstrative. It creates an atmosphere of mind through the use of metaphors, images, meter, alliteration and patterns of sound. It takes the readers into an intimate and profound sense of things through various suggestions, nuances and resonances. This explains why literature, like other forms of art, affects us subtly and profoundly. In lyric, drama, epic and the novel, the reference is to the world of imagination and of fiction. The statements in a novel, in a poem or in drama are not literally true. There is a central and important difference between a statement in a novel by the Balzac or even in a historical novel and the statement in a book of history or sociology. Even in the subjective lyric, the eye of the poet is a fictional dramatic eye. Time and space in a novel are not those of real life. The dramatist or the novelist creates his own and structure of events according to the law of probability. Even in even an apparently most realistic drama or novel, the very slice of life is constructed according to certain artistic conventions. The literary artists observe certain conventions which impose an order and organization on their works, and which life the works out of the matter of fact statements of the word of reality. Fictionality or imagination is another distinguishing trait of literature, and this is evident as much in the selection of life as in the organization of that life in the work. In these respects, Homer, Dante, Shakespeare, Keats and Rabindranath are different from Cicero, Montaigne, Emerson, Gibbon, Hume, etc. Gibbon's Decline and Fall of Roman Empire or Burke's Speeches on America have good style and general force of presentation, but they do not create a fictional world, nor do they use imaginative qualities of suggestive language. In short, their works do not provide the aesthetic satisfaction by taking the readers into a fictional world of joys and sorrows. In all forms of literature, there is an expression of the writer's own vision, his own sense of fact, his one intellectual and emotional reaction to man and things. History, economics, philosophy, science are all objective presentation in which the writer's own sense of fact is rigidly kept out. The writer's vision shapes the work of literature, and it becomes a thing of beauty, of reason, of its exquisite mode of presentation and expression. The personal vision becomes a thing of eternal interest by virtue of the manner of treatment. Thus, in a work of literature, both matter and manner are important. If it deals with any subjectival and draft, it cannot evoke the response of the readers. Again, if its treatment is commonplace and banal, it cannot attract the readers. Again, if its treatment is commonplace and banal, it cannot attract the readers. The human value of a work of art depends upon the nature of its theme. A poem, however well written on a trivial subject like a pair of scissors, cannot be as interesting as one on the fall of man or on the ingratitude of human beings. Paradise Lost or King Lear cannot be written on the deck of a lapdog or the glide of an aeroplane. It is not always lofty theme or elevated thought that is important in a work of literature. It is the range and it is the range and intensity of experiences that determine the place of the writer. King Lear is built on the common theme of the ingratitude of daughters. Othello is a drama of jealousy, but they become immortal creations because they fathom the depths of human experiences and carry out rich suggestions about eternal truths of life. The novel of Dostoevsky or Hardy stirs the depths of human heat because it renders enduring facts of life in moving language and pictures. Keats' Ode to Autumn or Ode to a Nightingale is no mere objective rendering of nature's beauty. It appeals to the human heart for its imaginative surrender to nature and for its beautiful images and melody. Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey is a greater poem than Davies' Leisure because of deeper significance and greater suggestiveness. Wizardry of sounds or sheer music does not make good poetry, just as lofty thoughts alone do not make good drama or a good poem. It is the harmonious combination of thought and style that gives rise to good literature. Keats is a greater poet than Swinburne because Keats aims at complete satisfaction. Shakespeare is a greater dramatist than Shaw because Shakespeare gives the eternal variety of life. Hardy is a greater novelist than Dickens because he takes us to the deeper depths of life. Greatness of an artist is determined by the richness and intensity of moments in life. A great work of art takes the readers to the very heart of truth and is therefore eternally true. It does not deal with that. It does not deal with what is evanescent, transitory and trivial. Keats is right when he says, beauty is truth, truth beauty. What is the scope of literature? Literature is a vital record of what men have seen in life, what they have experiences of it, what they have thought and felt about those aspects of it which have the most immediate and enduring interest of all of us. It is the interpretation of life, and life shapes itself in the mind of the interpreter. We care for literature because we care for life, because we are interested in knowing the varied aspects of it, because we like to know how men and women live life and think about life. Pleasure and profit are the two motives of the reading of literature. Literature is sweet and useful. This is the Horatian formula of Jules and Utile. All art is sweet and useful to the utmost. All art is sweet and useful to the appropriate users, but it articulates its superior to the self-induced reflection of the readers, and it gives them pleasure by the skill with which it articulates. But the pleasure of literature is higher pleasure because it is pleasure in a higher kind of activity. For example, non-accusative contemplation and the utility, the seriousness, the instructiveness of literature is a pleasurable seriousness. For example, note the seriousness of a duty which must be done or of a lesson to be learned, that an aesthetic seriousness, a seriousness of perception. Emerson says beauty is its own for being. Apart from any useful value of literature, which is stressed by the utilitarians and moralists, literature mainly appeals to us for the beautiful forms it creates. The good writer ushers man into a world of beauty and joy away from the harsh reality of everyday existence. By nature, man is a dreamer of happy dreams, a creator of unsubstantial visions. He feels happy when he is taken into the vexatious world of man and woman, suffering, struggling, and enjoying also. We find fictional characters realizing their dreams and desires, and he gets the pleasure of wish fulfillment. Even tragedy pleases him, because in tragedy there is an artistic conquest of the sorrow and pain of real life. It is not, however, true to say that literature makes us forget the problems of real life. We see in literature the problems of life in broader perspective. Literature enlarges our sympathies, and the pleasure is derived from the amplification of experience and enlargement of sympathies. Romantic literature is a reflection of the deepest aspirations of men, which are more real than the actual living of men and women. We are attracted to Keats or to Nightingale or Shelley's or to a Skylark because it expresses our deepest desires and emancipates us from the prison of actuality. Literature is a form of knowledge. Aristotle had seemed to say something like this in this famous dictum, that poetry is more philosophical than history. But the prime office of a writer is not to discover and communicate knowledge. His real function is to make use perceive. His real function is to make us perceive what we see, imagine, what we already conceptually or practically know. Imaginative literature is a fiction, an artistic verbal imitation of life. Aristotle called this mimesis. It imitates the universals, which include the marvels. Imaginative writers are discoverers of new perpetual values or new aesthetic qualities in the thing existing in reality. The pleasures of literature are thus derived from the discovery of these aesthetic qualities. Keats in his poem on reading Chapman Homer says great poetry reveals to him a new realm. It is the rediscovery of life. The reading of literature may be profitable only when it is done properly. Literature is a complex organism, and it is necessary for the readers to probe into it. A careful reading of the play Hamlet will reveal various thematic elements and show and how they are related to the same time the glorious intricacy of the design. The best literature is carefully written, records of kinds of experience that men have found significant, and literature that has endured has done so because men in different generations and in a variety of circumstances have felt that significance. Literature as vicarious experience has one great advantage. The imaginative readers can life in words, attainable in on other ways. We can discover what it means to a young man who has been betrayed by his mother's over hasty marriage to his father's murderer, or what it means to be obsessed by a white veil that has come to symbolize all of the arbitrary and hostile forces in the universe. Literature is designed to point out the significance of experience. Reading Moby Dick may be vicarious experience, but it experience in which every detail has been calculated to have maximum significance. The experience that grows with the careful but imaginative reading of a literary work is organized to produce the greatest possible impact. W. K. Wimsatt once defined a poem as a feat of style by which a complex meaning is handled all at once. This definition is true of all worthwhile literature with certain qualifications. The problem for the reader is to understand the full complexity of the meaning. For example, to experience as fully as possible the total work. Their literary criticism may help the readers to a considerable extent to read the work properly and in a worthwhile manner. Genres of literature. Genre is a French word which literally means kind, sort or style. The term is used in literary discourse to denote types or classes of literature, for example, poetry, fiction and drama. A literary genre follows certain common compositions which distinguish it from another literary genre. These common conventions enable a reader to recognize a literary composition as belonging to a certain literary genre and prevent him from mistaking it for any other kind. When we see a written composition using line breaks and containing sentences that do not run to the right margin of the page, we immediately recognize the composition as belonging to the class of literature called poetry. This is a convention which is more or less common to all poems and hence function as identification marker for the genre poetry. Lineation on literary genre is a recognizable and established category of written work which employs certain identifiable conventions which prevent readers from mistaking it for another genre. What is poetry? Poetry is the oldest of the three major forms of literature with roots deep in the rituals and religious observances of antiquity. Hence it was primarily oral, performance-oriented and public as it was, more often than not, a tool for supplication, communal tribal celebration and celebration of the supernatural as well as appreciation of the gifts of nature. From these early forms developed the personal and impersonal forms of poetry, presented by the lyric on the one hand and the traditional epic and ballad on the other, as well as we will deal with forms of poetry in more detail in later units. We shall now move to explicate the distinguishing characteristics of poetry, namely imagery, sound, rhythm and diction. Imagery refers to the use of sensory language in poetry. Sensory language is the use of words and descriptions which appeal the five senses of the reader or audience. Sound is another important aspect of poetry. How the poem sounds is as much important as what the poem means. The sound of the words used in poetry is as important as the meaning of words. Sometimes the sounds of the words add or modify the ordinary meaning of the words. poetry, unlike prose, is meant to be heard, and its original form was sung. Rhythm refers to the pattern of sounds perceived as the recurrence of equivalent beats at equal intervals. It not only adds to the musical quality of a poem, but also shapes the overall meaning and effect of a poem. Diction refers to the choice or selection of words used by the poet in his poem. Irrespective of these distinguishing qualities, poetry as a form of literary expression embodies all the defining qualities of literature such as imagination, creativity, suggestiveness or indirection, and as a mirror reflecting the individual's perception of the world. These poetical and literary qualities apply to both oral and written forms of poetry, except that the medium of expression and the transmission are different. Nevertheless, both the manifestations of poetry share identical content, form and effect. In other words, the obvious difference between these forms of poetry, their sources and purpose are emotions and imagination of the writer on the one hand and the reader or audience on the other. They convey significant truths about the human condition and they employ a language that is deliberately adorned by the use of figurative expressions. Now, poetry means different things to different people, and therefore it is not possible to provide a single definition of poetry. In other words, there is no standard definition of poetry. Let's take a break, please. Edgar Allan Poe says, I would define poetry of words as the rhythmical creation of beauty. Its sole arbiter is taste. With the intellect or with the conscience, it has only collateral relations, unless incidentally. It has no concern whatever either with beauty or with truth. According to William Wordsworth, poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. According to Percy Bysshe Shelley, P.B. Shelley, poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the best and happiest minds. According to Samuel Taylor Coleridge, According to S.T. Caldish, the proper and immediate object of science is the acquirement or communication of truth. Then the proper and immediate object of poetry is the communication of pleasure. According to Andrew Bradley, an actual poem is the succession of experiences, sounds, images, thoughts, emotion, through which we pass when we are reading as vertically as we can. According to Dylan Thomas, the rhythmic, inevitably narrative movement from an overwrought blindness to a naked vision. Edwin Arlington Robinson says, poetry is a language that tells us through a more or less emotional reaction, something that cannot be said. All poetry, great or small, does this. A perusal of the above definitions makes it clear that there cannot be a single definition that will be comprehensive enough to accommodate the various shades of opinions and schools of thought regarding the exact nature of the genre. We cannot say that one definition is superior, better, or more comprehensive or authoritative than another. However, we can certainly say that each of them has its point of emphasis, which in turn places it in one or the other of the great literary debate over content, style, and effect. It is apparent that Poe's idea of poetry, as stated above, emphasizes the styles or form over content and effect, while on the other hand, both Wordsworth and Robinson focus more attention on content and effect in their definitions. Further, we should note the recurrence of some common words and phrases such as emotion, feelings, rhythm, rhythmical, truth, pleasure, imaginative expression, language, etc., which underscores the routine nature of poetry and which make it susceptible to being conceived of variously definers by defines the way the proverbial blind man saw and defined the elephant. To sum up all the definition, poetry is a genre of composition in verse form which expresses deep feelings, noble thought in a rhythmic, beautiful and embellished language written with the aim of communicating an experience. Now we will discuss in detail the elements or salient features which differentiate or distinguish poetry from the other two literary genres, prose and drama. These elements constitute the tools by which poetry conveys the thoughts and experiences they wish to communicate. Although there are many elements or tools which poets use to convey thoughts and experiences, those are most used to exclusively in poetry are imaginary, rhythm, sound and diction. In its simplest sense, imagery is a term used to refer to the images in a poem or all the objects and qualities of sense perception in a poem. In other words, if the representation of the five kinds of sense perception as opposed to abstract conception, thus it is the sensory content of a poem or literary work which appeals to our five sensory faculties. Sometimes when we read poems, images or pictures of objects described in the lines appear before our mind's eyes. It seems as if we are seeing the images or pictures right before us. The word rhythm is derived from the Greek word which translates in English into flow. As one of the elements of poetry, it is considered as the most important of a poet's technical resources. According to Reeves, rhythm uh, is a form of repetition. A repetition of a particular pattern of light and heavy syllables, whereas Abrahams defines it as a recognizable though variable pattern in the beat of the stretches in the stream of sound. Sound is the third distinguishing feature of poetry. Along with rhythm, it constitutes the foundation of the musical quality that is associated with poetry as a form of literature. Its functions in a poem are similar to those of rhythm. The significance of sound in a poem can be better appreciated when the poem is read aloud. The sound qualities of a poem are also experienced when read silently through the mind's ear. When efficiently deployed in a poem, sound effects enable the reader or auditor to obtain a state of mind in which he can more easily appreciate the emotion and meanings conveyed in the poem by the writer. According to Pease and Newton, much of the delight to be derived from the reading of poetry stems from the pleasures experienced in contemplating patterns which are not only decorative but significant. Diction refers to the peculiar choice of words used by the poet or his vocabulary. In the words of Abrahams, the selection of words in a work of literature, a writer's diction can be analyzed under such categories as the degree to which his vocabulary is abstract or concrete, Latinate or Anglo-Saxon is origin. Latinate or Anglo-Saxon in origin, colloquial or formal, technical or common, literal or figurative. The diction of a poet indicates the interest, habit of mind, and the period of the poet. The poet's diction can also be described as plain or ornate, homely or exotic, contemporary or archaic, familiar or cryptic, etc. What is fiction? The word prose refers to the reader. The word prose refers to the ordinary or everyday use of language and is derived from the Latin word prosa, which literally means straightforward. It basically means saying something in a straightforward way and not in a poetic way. Thus, what we speak and write for our ordinary purpose in a straightforward manner without any embellishment and regard for diction, imaginary, sound and rhythm is prose. Diction comes from the Latin word fictum, which means created. Fiction is a term used to denote anything, mainly stories or accounts that our mother or grandmother used to tell us about animals, monsters or even human beings that existed in a faraway countries are fictional narratives. Thus fiction is therefore any form of narrative which deals in part or in whole with events that are not factual but rather are imaginary and invented by its author. But poetry and prose can be fictional or factional. But poetry and prose can be fictional or factual. However, the word fiction usually refers to prose fiction, that is, fiction written in neither prose nor poetry. Now we have discussed the term prose and fiction. Prose fiction refers literary works which are fictional and are presented in a narrative form. Fiction and narrative are words that distinguish prose fiction from any other form of narrative or fictional work. For example, drama is fiction, but it is presented in dialogue and enacted on the stage and not narrated. The genre of prose fiction consists of the short story, the novella, the novellas, and the novel. In the words of Frank Kermode, a prose fiction is a literary work that has a personal narrative, a hero to the identity, a hero to the identity to identify with fictional invention, style, and suspense. In short, anything that might be handled with a rather personal ventures of creativity and artistic freedom. Prose fiction may exaggerate or distort facts, or the story may be completely an invention of the writer. It depends on the style of the writer or what the writer wants to achieve. Although the story in prose fiction is invented by the writer, it is presented in a realistic manner. Usually, prose fiction treats essentially personal subject matter, which is open to various interpretations by the reader. What we read in prose fiction are events, incidents, and experiences that affect human beings. It relays human experience from the writer's imagination and is seen as a field of cultural significance to be explored with a critical and didactic interest in the subjective perceptions both of artists and their readers. The origin of modern prose fiction in its present form, particularly the novel, is traced to the development of letter writing, which is associated with elegance and style. They include an amalgam of genres that included history and science in vernaculars, personal memories, fiction and poetry. Gradually, prose fiction in this wider spectrum soon became a prominent medium for the creation of a distinct style of writing and communication. The style gave artists an opportunity for artistic experimentation and originally needed to exhibit and market his or her style. The reading of prose fiction later became fashionable and is remained close to everyday language. Thank you. All my brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, student and scholar, teacher and trainer, professor, professionals, reader, writers, listeners, speakers, the most honorable present Professor Modiji, adorable ministers and managers, honorable advocates, advertisers, administrators and advisors. I thank all the listeners. Thank you.